All right, you are good to go.
Okay. Well, we are going to open the meeting, I think, promptly. And Carrie, can we have you call the roll?
Absolutely. Councilmember Rafter,
Here.
Councilmember Murphy,
Here.
Councilmember Ritzberger,
Here.
and Councilmember Lepari Shu.
Unmute.
You're
but that's
muted.
okay. And we also have in the meeting Dave Merzig, Doug Brenner, Gary Herzig, and I think Greg Matisse, who's coming up without a picture, but that's looks like he's here. So first order of business. Do we have any minutes?
Minutes
Oh,
were
hi.
distributed with Friday's materials.
Okay. Do we wish to approve the minutes? Luke, Dave,
Yeah, sounds good to me.
okay.
I'm just
I didn't
pulling
see
them up
any
here.
issues with it, John.
Okay, nor do I. Katie? Minutes? Approved minutes?
I didn't look at them. So if you guys think they're good, I'll take your word for it.
Okay. There we go. Now, unless I missed my guess, I don't have the agenda in front of me, but I think the first thing on the agenda, am I right? Is it the flag or the snow emergency?
Snow emergency.
Those were- Yeah.
Snow emergency. Okay. What are we talking about with the snow emergency? Katie, you brought this up. I believe you wanted it on the agenda.
Yeah. So basically our snow emergency policy, I don't think anybody thinks it's a
Hey,
great
Sydney, I'm in a
idea.
meeting. I'll have to call you back.
I don't think
Okay.
anybody thinks it's a great idea. So I just wanted us to do a little bit of homework, and by us, I mean I did a little bit of homework, and I want to share it with you. Basically, what I'm proposing is a change to the code with regard to our snow emergency parking procedure. And I did find the subsection for that, but I don't have it in front of me right now. But basically what it states now is that after 2.5 inches of snow, all cars have to be off city streets, which is challenging because there are many places that don't have off-street parking. And as a city, right, we're trying to utilize our space better. And some of that involves eliminating some off-street parking. So what I did was look at other cities and what they do, because we're not the only place that gets snow. And so the two cities whose policies stood out to me where something in a hybrid might, can you guys hear me?
Yep, I can.
Okay, great. You're all frozen, so I was afraid that I was just talking to myself alone in my room. So the two cities that really stood out to me as having kind of workable policies that I thought we could fit to our community were Syracuse and Buffalo. They both have more cars and more snow than we do. So for this to work for them successfully says to me that we ought to be able to make some form of it work here in our fair little city. So let me put my notes here so that I can just say it clearly. And so I will say, Mayor, in response to the email that you had sent out about city involvement or about staff involvement with this, I totally agree with you. It only works in theory if it works in practice. So I'm really glad that Greg is here. I did send him an email early last week regarding this. I know that we had talked about getting or the possibility of obtaining a consultant for our general parking strategy, but this feels like something that is manageable by the council. Like I said, if we're willing to dig in and do a little bit of homework and then just coordinate with the right parties, everybody who's involved. I'm excited to hear from Greg today. I was in touch with David Hoteling, and he said that from a transit perspective, it all looked good. And I see that we have Chief Brenner here too, so we might be able to actually get somewhere with this today, which would be great. So the basic structure would be that certain city streets, which would be determined and posted by the needs of transportation, so OPT, and public safety, would be no parking during a winter event. So just as they are now, all cars would need to be moved then to side streets where time, so if it said 2-hour parking, you obviously wouldn't have to move your car in 2 hours, but not location. So if it says no parking, there's no parking. Restrictions would be lifted until 6:00 p.m. the day after the event ends, when the parking regulations would then go back to normal. That way plows could work freely on major routes, sort of essential streets, again, for transportation and for safety purposes, and then as possible on alternate sides of other streets. I know that when we talked with Greg about street sweeping, he was saying that street sweeping takes about 2 weeks to do the entire city. Obviously, it doesn't take 2 weeks to plow the entire city, but that kind of got me thinking that, you know, all the streets aren't being plowed all at once simultaneously. So we can be strategic, take a little bit of the headache off of, you know, folks who rely on on-street parking, and still be able to function in a smart way. So I sent you guys, and I'm going to see if I can share, but basically what I did was take all of the OPT routes and layer them on top of a city map to figure out the essential streets for bus travel. And they are 16 streets. And there are 2 that they said, that David said could be theoretically rerouted during a snow emergency. So they are, do you guys want me to list them, or do you want me to share the map that I drew? Let me see if I can do that, because I actually don't know how to do that.
I have
Are
the
you
one
guys
you
still with
emailed
me?
out.
I was just gonna say,
You
I have
do?
the one that you
Okay.
emailed if you want me to.
Yes, please. Great. So it's really poorly drawn because it's hard to do that. And so, but basically you'll notice, and I stopped roughly right at like city lines on some of these streets. But basically from the left, you have Chestnut Street and West End Ave, which would allow you to get into that residential neighborhood there. South of that, you have River Street, all of the Main Street, Market Street, Grand Division, Chestnut Street Extension loop where the buses kind of rally. All of Main Street obviously is mostly no parking to begin with. I'm pointing like you guys can see, I'm sorry. Out on the East End, that is Rose Avenue, Chester Street, and East End Avenue, that little loop there. Let's see, up Maple and East Streets, which allows you to get, again, up into the Center City neighborhood and up East Street to the high school and the college. Center Street and West Street, I think is the last one on there that I haven't talked about. So they're all pretty much main arteries or a function of needing to be able to turn buses and presumably plows around. So like I said, Dave Hoteling said that this looked good on the transportation perspective. Like I said, I would love to hear from the streets and facilities perspective and also public safety. And then with regard to council involvement, just what your thoughts are on this being our new policy theoretically going forward. So I will turn it over to whoever wants to speak on this.
I have one question to start with Katie.
Sure.
These, the red lines, these will be void of parked cars after
Right.
2.5 inches, and those will be plowed.
Right. And so the idea is that these streets would be plowed more effectively and faster because they are the only ones, right, that you could get to like straight away. But it would
Okay.
give, like I said, it would give transportation access, but then also I tried to think about public safety in terms of getting into neighborhoods quickly.
What is the,
So yeah,
what
so the
would
red
be the
line-
plan? What would be the plan to getting into neighbor? But I have a question for Greg.
Sure.
How many miles of street do we have approximately?
40.
We have 40 miles of street. Okay. Okay, I just want to know that, but then the other streets would be plowed. There would be cars parked on those streets.
Right. So the idea would be that you would still follow location restrictions, but if something said 2-hour parking, that wouldn't apply. And then all of the regulations would go back to normal at the evening after the snow event ended. So if it's like a 3-day event, then for the duration of that event until the following day at 6, people would have to dig out their cars and move them so that we could plow 100% of the 40 miles.
Katie, could I jump in, Katie, with a question?
Please.
Yeah, please. Yeah,
So
this is nothing without you guys.
the idea of, if I understand you correctly, we would only plow the main routes as you've shown them here, or as we would adjust them, and we would leave the side
Well-
streets till the next day.
Not necessarily. So you would prioritize the red streets and then be able to plow the other streets sort of as you can, right?
Right now, it takes us 4 hours to plow the entire city. We have 10 plow routes, as well as 1 to 2 salt trucks and a supervisor, plus the backhoe taking care of the parking
Uh-huh.
lot. So it takes us 4 hours to do the whole city. Obviously, the routes are broken up. We're not, we're progressing through the city over that time. And the main routes that we
Right.
have highlighted are prioritized.
Okay.
There's additional salt going there. So I don't think, from my experience, except for in the heaviest of storms where it's, more than 2 inches per hour and it's literally unsafe for our drivers to be on the road, we pull the trucks off until it slows down again. We've never really had any
Uh-huh.
trouble keeping the main routes clear.
Right.
So I guess, and then the other trouble,
Okay.
and not to, I don't know, I'm going to sound like I'm picking a part of it. I think it's a good idea to look at this. But the side streets, a lot of our streets are very narrow. I'm sure other cities have narrow streets and they have exceptions as well. But if you take Columbia Street, Washington Street, any of those one-ways, Pine Street, Gulf,
Uh-huh.
once you get enough snow, I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot. It's tough to even get down, even with a pickup truck that typically plows that route without pushing snow into cars and damaging things, or just physically not being able to fit on some of the most narrow ones. So those would be obviously the straightaway exceptions that would have to have no parking because we just couldn't
Okay.
fit. I think
Right.
there'd be
Like
more
Cozy
than
Ave.
you might guess. Yeah, there's be quite a few of them. So
Okay.
then I guess a concern is, and not that it's insurmountable, just a concern point to make is that if you have a bunch of streets that are no parking during snowstorm, and then just around the corner the next street over is something different, it might get confusing to residents.
Yeah. Yeah.
just-
I
just
think it would
to
just have to
consider.
be clearly marked. Yeah. So that's great news actually about the priority streets, because it sounds like if we were to change the regulation, it wouldn't, how do I say this? It would take a burden off of the residents without really impacting DPW's current operations. The only thing would be then the side streets. And so it would be helpful if you could determine the streets where it wouldn't be feasible to have, so we can really take a look at what that looks like citywide.
Yeah, I think,
So I know you mentioned Washington.
yeah, obviously our nickname, the City of the Hills, any of the hills, to not plow them during a snowstorm, I think would be problematic. You'd end up with, there's a lot of cars that even, in upstate New York don't have great traction, great snow tires, and can get stuck pretty easily, and we wouldn't want to create a dangerous situation. And I guess really what it comes down to for me, I think what the direction ultimately I would like from this committee or the council would be what level of service do you want to provide? And then let me
Right.
work with DPW and our group to come up with the action plan. How can we accomplish that? So in the past,
Okay.
there's been some discussion. We've never really had a clear policy that says, some cities might have a bare road policy. We want like DOT, which isn't a city, but it's another organization that plows roads. They want to keep the roads bare all the
Right.
time. We don't have that, and the way we've been doing things the last couple of years, depending on the timing of the snowstorm, in the middle of the night, like after 2 a.m. when the buses stop running on a typical Thursday through Saturday, you're not going to see many plow trucks out there. You might not see anything, depending on what's going on. Maybe a couple salt trucks, but not even that in some cases. And we'll come at 4 o'clock or maybe 3:30, and we'll plow. It takes about 4 hours. We try to get, so really 3 o'clock, we come in and try to get everything cleared off the first time by 7 a.m. when people are starting, school buses are on the road, people are starting to go to work and that sort of thing. I think even with that, we've gotten some complaints, and sometimes it's from our own people. We adjust with the bus schedule, but sometimes the police department or the fire department might have an issue where they need to get somewhere, and you have to have kind of all the roads clear to a certain extent to allow public safety to get around, which you can't predict where they need to go. So that's sort of a problem at times. For the most part, that midnight to 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., depending on the day, is not a big deal. But we still do have some problems there. And then just in general, now, if you went to not clearing certain streets, wherever they are, I feel like our phone would be ringing off the hook. Why is the plow truck skipping Washington? It'd have to be clearly communicated. A lot of plow incidents is all I'm saying. There's a lot of different considerations, and we're willing to look at that.
Yeah.
Sure. Maybe there's other options too.
Can we hear from other folks? Could you take this? I can't see people. Could we take the map down? Great. Let's hear from round robin, from Luke to Dave, who's waving. So let's start with you, Dave. Wavy Davy.
Thanks. I guess I have a question first and then sort of a statement about it. But the statement really depends on the answer to the question. So am I correct that we're looking to all those main roads, we're looking to have no parking there, but then allow on-street parking elsewhere in the city? Are we looking to switch over to opposite sides of the street parking so that we can slowly clear the street? Is that the purpose of this? Okay, I heard you say yes, but you're muted. So,
Well,
Katie.
let's.
Yeah, and again-
What's the answer to Dave's question?
Well, again, that might be something where, with Greg, if we say this is the way that we want to go and we talk about the level of service, I think he was spot on with, my idea was that these main roads would be bare. And then, this is only during the event, right? So then we have the day after the event, after the snow has stopped, where, we would be plowing. So I would leave that system of how the quote unquote side streets get cleared up to DPW. They would know the best way to figure that out. And I think just to kind of think about Greg's point, I think that there's always confusion and pain points in every policy, right? Like right now, people are not happy that they have to move their car off the street and their car is 4 blocks away and it's in a blizzard and then they have to dig it out in a parking lot. So I think it's just, something to think about. So sorry, to answer your question, Dave, like my mind says yes, but I don't know that that's the actual answer.
Okay. I guess what I'm thinking about with it, and I understand we need to find a way to allow some on-street parking during events. Yeah. I've lived in a lot of other cities. I've seen the gambit of what happens. Like we're Oneonta, everybody's gone, but then we eventually have a clear street. And in the morning, getting up and trying to get out to work, it's relatively easy to do. The opposite ends of the spectrum was the city of Buffalo years ago, where you'd get up the next morning and you'd still have a foot of snow in all the side streets, because the only thing they did were the main avenues. So then it became really dangerous to get out in that case. So yeah, I would really want to rely on DPW for figuring out if we're going to do on-street parking. I got to find a better way to say this. On-street parking, how to still make sure that people can get out in the morning. And the other thing that we need to consider is, if we're not clearing the street completely, if we have a storm where we get a foot of snow dumped, or not even, it won't take that much, you're going to get mounds of snow pushed off onto the parking areas, which people can get out, but then it makes it really difficult to try to find parking again when people are trying to park. And we can run into actually losing a lot of parking spots too in that case. So we've got to somehow time it with, I know not every street has opposite side of the street parking, but we've got to somehow come up with a system that incorporates that with the clearing then, if we're not going to tell everybody, get your car off the street with the snow event.
Luke,
Right.
would you like to speak now, or?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's get my tongue tied a little bit. Thank you, Katie, for looking at this and coming up with some options. I think it's important because, you know, we are October, November snow is not unheard of. Halloween snow is not unheard of. So it's a good thing that we're looking at this. My two questions at the moment, which I know this is kind of the beginning of an idea, so I obviously don't expect complete answers right now, but maybe just something to think about. And it's something that both Greg and Dave touched on a little bit, is the confusion aspect. I think it's pretty well laid out on your map, but you know, there's a lot of people that don't use the website, that don't necessarily read the paper. They can obviously see the signs, but if they're looking for a rhyme or reason to why A street is plowed and why B street is allowed parking, I think we just want to make sure going forward that we're really good with the communication aspect. And I think that doing kind of the opposite street side parking, which Dave brought up, would be another tangentially related issue. Whereas if we're allowing people to park on the side streets, and again, if we do get a large storm, the snow does pile up quickly. And to Dave's point, as well as Greg's point, that it can take a while to get rid of that. And if it's just sitting there, some people could be stuck in their cars for a little bit, or their cars could be stuck there for a little bit. So just kind of thinking about that going forward as well. Excuse me.
Okay. I know when Katie and I corresponded a bit, we were talking about the strategy, and I don't know if it's a strategy, but I think it's a rule currently. If there's 2.5 inches or 3 inches of snow, the rule is all the streets will be clear. People will need to find a place to put their cars if they don't have a driveway, or if they can go into somebody else's. And the strategy is to have a one size fits all, your cars not to be on the street. And that will permit the streets department or streets to effectively clear the snow in more or less one fell swoop, or maybe a couple times if necessary, if it's a very heavy snow. And that I'm not sure that changing it isn't going to create new problems. That is, I've lived in cities where basically Philadelphia would say the main arteries will be clear. You will not have a car near them. The side streets will bury you there. We'll do anything we want and you will shovel out your own damn car, because we're not coming to help you unless you happen to be a councilman. it's just easy to follow. We've been doing it for years, since I've been here, and it's 20 years, I reckon, and it seems to work pretty well. So I'm not sure that endeavoring to make it convenient, or what seemingly would be convenient, that we're not going to have more people frustrated. For example, if a street, how can I say, if someone cleans out their own car, and then goes to work, and somebody takes their parking place, there's the war beginning. How dare you be doing that? Because you're parking on a street, and people actually leaving from one of the favored routes for clearing, where once they come out, they'll say, well, I'll go to one of those streets where I could leave it there. I'm just not sure that some of that confusion is not going to breed more problems for residents, I reckon. And so I'm not all that enthusiastic about changing it. But my point, I'm always going to be, I have a resolution to be plain spoken for the rest of my term. So I don't like the idea of changing it.
Sure. And I think that that's a fair concern, John. Anything that we do might not work, right? For me, I don't think that's an excuse not to do anything. Because we always have the option to learn from our mistakes and go forward. So.
David? I'm seeing hands. So Dave?
I gotta start waving, I guess. I see a reason for starting to look at a process to make a change, though, because with especially if the D Street Lofts project gets made, if we have Springbrook develop in the Ford block, and I think there's definitely a move by a lot of people that are living downtown to not have to move their cars during an event. Other cities they do it and they get it done, but I think where I've always seen that street clearing is done well is when you have opposite side of the street parking enacted. And yeah, we do have some really narrow streets that will be problematic. We may not be able to have every street the same, but I think we certainly need to have most of our streets marked the same way. I wouldn't want to make any change with plowing unless we do that opposite side of the street parking and make that change. Because I think if we don't do that, we're going to run into problems. And if it's timed right, you plow the street, you plow the one side of the street that doesn't have parking. And then as soon as people move their car, and it might be a couple days later, then you can clear the rest of the street. I mean, obviously, I would rely on DPW with their input on this, or even wait until we decide if we're going to have a parking guru come in and give us a plan or give us some options. But I think we can't do one without the other, I guess is what I'm saying. That's just my opinion.
Gary?
Just to follow up on something that Dave said, a year ago, I had spoken with Greg, George, and others. When we started to get serious about the Lofts on D Street project, it became clear that we have to change the snow emergency policy because we will not have enough off-street parking spaces for every single person in the city to move their car off the street once the Lofts on D Street are built. And, I was told we can come up with something that will work. We haven't seen that yet. And part of that is because of COVID. So not, pointing any fingers, but we do need to come up with a new plan for how to move forward on changing our policy of snow emergency. I also, whoever came with 2.5 inches. I don't know. That sounds nuts to me. But so it's something we definitely have to do. So Katie, thank you for initiating the conversation because it has to be discussed. I would suggest that we take Greg and the people who understand what goes into plowing the streets, take some of your recommendations, Katie, along with the other considerations, and work that into a plan that they can bring back to council, or if they think they need a consultant to do it, be better done by a consultant as part of a broader parking policy. They can recommend that and come back to council with some suggestions, maybe even more than one suggestion, council to review. One word of caution about the current proposed plan, a story that probably not even the birthday boy is old enough to remember. But in 1960, John Lindsay was elected as mayor of the city of New York. He was a very popular mayor. A couple of years later, there was a blizzard hit New York City, and he had the main streets plowed first and the neighborhood streets not prioritized. The people who lived in the city never forgave him for that because they couldn't get to work. They couldn't dig their cars out. And as popular as he was, that one event caused him to lose his reelection because the people of the city never forgave him for ignoring their streets and just prioritizing the main streets. So just an interesting story from 60 years ago.
More recent is Chicago. Chicago failed during a big snowstorm to fully plow its streets. And it may have been the end of the Democratic machine temporarily anyway. That was one of the first women mayors of Chicago to succeed at one of the dailies. It was all a snowstorm. But anyway, others? Where are we with this then?
It sounds
Gary,
like
Gary, I think, was recommending turning this problem over to Greg or to others. Greg is saying, no, I will not accept. No,
That's not what I'm saying. Do you want me to speak? I can talk.
Greg
It
just
did look
signed
like
off.
that, Greg.
Yes, I think that's a
Totally.
good idea. I think going back to Dave's point before about, my initial reaction without looking at it further is that we can't make an improvement without implementing alternate side parking. You can't leave the cars in the street and then expect to clear that side of the street the next day unless there's a clear direction by the parking regulations for them to move over. Unless you're saying the next day everyone gets off the street, which then you have the same problem if you're forcing all the cars to try to go to the parking lots or to work or whatever. So I'm not sure that would work. So I think the only chance this has is with alternate side parking, which is why I think it's important to look at the parking issue at the same time, because we're talking about if you change this regulation, you need to put a lot of new signs up, and that takes time and there's a real cost to that. So it should be really well thought out and done in conjunction with a parking change as well. So it's definitely something we can work on. It's just going to take some time, and I'll disappoint everyone right now and say I don't see this happening and signs being changed and a whole new system in place for the first time snow flies in 2020 or 2021. I think over the course of this year, we could get something well thought out, planned, and implement it. But maybe I'll surprise myself, but I'm not real confident that it's something that we can push through that quickly. So what I'll do, I'll organize our people in DPW and work with the police and OPT and fire department and put our heads together and come back probably the next legislative meeting with
Sure.
more thoughts and discussion on it. Does that work?
Greg, could you keep me in the loop on that?
I guess. I mean, do you want to keep the whole legislative committee in the loop? I prefer to work with the committee and not communicate with one council member at a time. I have to.
Well, the other
How about
thing,
if there's any change or progress, Greg, you feel that we need to know before our next meeting, to prepare us, send it out to the whole committee? That's my suggestion, anyway.
well, it might be good
I
to,
was just
to
looking for a
report. Yeah, I think it might be good to report to the entire council because we're not moving anything forward that's really legislation, which is what we normally do. So we're saying Greg will be looking further into this, but I think I'll report this to the other members of the council, all the council. And if there's any other chiming in that needs to be done in anticipation of a change, we can further look at the details of that. So,
I mean, I was just hoping to know what the conversation looks like for my own learning. It's, I don't know. It seems weird to
okay.
make it like, I'm not trying to make it a thing, and I feel like it's being made a thing. Like, I just want information. I don't feel like a CC on an email is a major
think-
overstep, but it's a problem, then I guess.
I'm not
I'll
saying
find out
anything's a
whenever.
problem. Okay.
No,
Um,
not you, John. I
Never
guess I don't understand why. It doesn't matter. Forget it.
So, okay. And Doug, David, anyone else have any questions, thoughts?
Not on the parking. No.
Okay, all right. So Greg, you're going to be beginning some thought and dialogue with people on the staff, including people who are regular drivers by their duties to be on the street, what other people need to do, and you'll start letting us know as you make progress. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I would also think, and this is something that different council members can do, it would certainly be important to hear what residents feel
Sure.
about a plan in which their streets will not be prioritized, to be plowed, and whether they're comfortable with that and what impact they see that might have on them being able to get to work or getting their kids to school or whatever it may be. So, doing some field work with local residents as to how they feel about that plan is better to hear beforehand than afterward.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth being realistic that Cozy Ave isn't plowed with the same fervency as Center Street, right? And that's true of many streets in every ward. And so I don't know that if we frame it in the way where we say your street won't be plowed, that's not what I'm suggesting. Most people will say, yeah, it's hard to get out of my street anyway. If you put it like that. I think what I'm asking for is a scheduling solution from DPW that allows us to make sure that travel through the city is possible, like you said, Mayor, by people who, or maybe John Rafter said it, by people who drive the most during those events. And then we have a strategic method for maintaining a good level of service for the rest of the streets without requiring every single car off the road. So I would just be cautious about wandering around the community saying we're not going to plow your street, because that's not what I'm suggesting at all. And I doubt that that's what DPW will come back with.
All right. Next topic is flags. David, or either David, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks. This really came out of everything that Cooperstown, the discussions in Cooperstown over their flagpole last year, which got really weird and heated, and that was over who would fly what kind of flag on it, and there was some discussion of, well, if you let one flag fly, you're going to have to let groups that want to fly flags that are like the Nazi flag was brought up. I mean, it got into a ridiculous conversation. So I started thinking about the flagpole we have out in front of our public safety building and in front of the courts. And I understand right now, I mean, we've got the American flag that flies, and we've got the police blue line flag, thin blue line flag that flies. And for those of you who aren't aware, and Chief, you can correct me on this if I mess anything up, because I don't mean to. The thin blue line flag really came out of, I think it started in the 1950s, and the thought came from the Crimean War with the thin red line. And the thought is that the police are the thin line that exists between society, civil society, and chaos. And this is something I firmly believe in. What I'm seeing though lately is, and this is no fault of the police, but there's a lot of upheaval in our society right now. We've become more and more polarized. And I think of some of the protests we've had where you've got Black Lives Matter on one side, and then you've got others that are the opposing view. And what we've started to see are they have kind of, some of them have hijacked the thin blue line flag from the police, and so they have that on the other side. And so I started thinking of our flagpole that's out in front of the city courts, and I think it's really important that that building and the city court is looked as neutral ground, because it's supposed to be represent, whether it's a Black Lives Matter flag flying or the thin blue line flag. And I know it's not an equal comparison between the two flags, but if we start arguing about what should be flying up there, and for anything that's other than the American flag or the New York State flag, I'm just afraid we're going to bring that polarization into the city courts. And I hope you guys were able to hear me. So right now, there's no policy saying what should be flying on that flagpole. And I believe, especially with the way society is right now, the only flags we should have on there are the New York State flags and the American flag. I think the thin blue line flag is an important flag. It's a very important flag to our police department. But I think with the way things are right now, I think that should be inside their department. And held there. Those are my thoughts. Luke is trying to talk, John, and John, you're muted.
All right, Luke, speak.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this up, Dave. I think it's a good point. You know, I think it just reaffirms the city's stance as to being, you know, just strictly enforcing the law is what the court should be for. You know, we could debate about higher up what they could be used for, but I think it's a good idea, because You're right. It could set a precedent if we don't have a flag that's just up there for the state flag versus the United States flag. Not to say in any way that the thin blue line flag will lead to something a lot worse, but I think it's a good idea. I think it could prevent us from going down a rabbit hole that we really don't want to go down. So I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I just think I agree, Luke. I just think there's a lot of knuckleheads out there on both sides, and unfortunately, I feel like this flag has been hijacked by some of those knuckleheads. And I feel bad for the police department. This wasn't something I wanted to bring up, but
I'll just kind of jump in quick. I don't know the history behind the Korean War and the whole thing there. That flag generally represents officers who are killed in the line of duty. We put it up as a support, as a morale issue for our officers and for our department, because after all, this is a police department. We put it up on special occasions. We put it up during certain times. We've left it up recently to show support for the department for everything that's going on nationally. We've never had a problem with it in the past. It's gone up and gone down, mostly unnoticed, except for a few people when there is a large event. We also put up on our building, just so you know, there is a small message board that's owned and managed by the PBA, and they put up tributes to certain things. We share it with the fire department whenever there's an officer lost, or even a local, like if there's a passing of a retired member, we put something up there for them as well. We've always done that, and I think it's important for the morale of our department to have some sort of acknowledgement like that. And I guess that's about all I really have on it right now.
John, I mean, maybe what we want to have is a policy that I don't know if we have a group that wants, well, this is going down the same rabbit hole that Cooperstown went down. That's what I'm afraid of, is allowing, if a group wants to fly the flag on the city's flagpole, that they file for a period of time for it, because I certainly would understand why the chief would want to fly that. And if, for example, if there's an officer that dies in the line of duty, God forbid, they would want to put that up there. But I think there needs to be a finite time any extra flag would fly on the flagpole, rather than just have a unlimited amount, since it's really it's the city's flagpole. It's there in front of the courts for a reason. I think any city you go into, that's where you find a flagpole in front of the courts, the fire, the police, normally in front of City Hall. But I think we need to have some type of policy dictating what goes up on the pole, how long something goes up for the pole. And I'm certainly fine with allowing other flags, but knowing that could be another rabbit hole, as I said before, that we're going down. Because I certainly wouldn't want to get into the battles of what Cooperstown went through. And maybe Mr. Merzig has some suggestions for us on that too. But I'm going to be quiet here. I see Luke had his hand up, and Katie's been quiet. I don't know if she has anything to say about this or not.
I'll we hear from Luke and Katie if she wishes for a comment or statement.
Katie, I've already yapped a little bit. Do you want a chance to get a word in?
Sure. Yeah. I think that such a tricky subject. let me keep thinking for a minute before I open my mouth.
Then I would just, I think, I guess this is more of a question. In regards, sorry, to what happened in Cooperstown, do they have a permit process, or was it more the village was deciding what flags were going up when? Do you know, Dave? Or John, or
They
anybody?
didn't have a policy, and one of their councilmen wanted to fly the gay pride flag during Pride Week. And
So that was a village, that wasn't like somebody putting a permit
Right.
out there. That was the village saying we're going to fly X flag.
And that had never been done before in Cooperstown. They only had the American flag flying,
Okay.
and they had no policy. So they were afraid that, well, without some kind of policy, this could potentially open this up to every group on the planet trying to
Right.
put something up there because it's Cooperstown.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I personally don't see why we shouldn't have a policy, and I think it's a good idea. Regardless of what kind of flag goes up there, I think it's paramount. We do have the American flag up at all times, and other flags can be through permit, through rotation, however we want to do that. But I think it's a good idea to have a policy set in place, just to avoid any unnecessary offense, any unnecessary conflict that we don't need at this time. We're all going through a lot, making sure that we have a clear definition of what goes up, what comes down, what stays, or have a policy of how it goes forward. I think would save the city a lot of pain and a lot of headache.
Well, we can, Katie?
I was just gonna ask a clarifying question. So are we discussing the policy of not having any flags other than the American flag and the state flag? Or are we discussing the possibility of any group who so wishes to fly their flag on the flagpole in front of the public safety building or city hall? I'm
I
assuming.
think that's a really good question, Katie, that we need to define because, and I apologize. I think I'm the one that's brought up the possibly having a permit for a different flag, but my fear with the current political climate is if we put a policy in that says, well, anybody can fly a flag up there. If they file a permit and they can fly what they want for 2 weeks or whatever we decide to do, that you could end up having a group that is also anti-police or anti-fire decide that they want to fly a flag right on the flagpole in front of the public safety building, which would be a complete insult, a kick in the teeth to our police department and our fire department.
Right.
So that's why I guess I was leaning toward only saying for now, it's New York State flag, American flag, and leave it at that. Just because I'm afraid of what we could end up running into.
Another issue I can foresee, Dave. Oh, I'm sorry, Katie.
That's okay. I was just going to say, I would agree. I think that's what flagpoles are for. We have other places for display.
Mhm.
I will say I understand the location and the reasoning that the chief was giving us. I think that the only way that I would say, because like I get it, and it's horrible when someone dies in the line of duty, and of course we want to honor them. Maybe there's just a different way that we can do it than flying that flag that, for so many people, there is a polarization around that image. And so I think that there has to be a way that we can memorialize those fallen officers without turning the flagpole to another place where we have a permit and we're displaying all kinds of imagery and things like that. Because we have other places in the city. In fact, we just opened one up like last month, another place in the city on public property where we can display, where anyone can display practically anything. So I don't think that the flagpole needs to be included in that. That's my 2 cents.
Another issue I could see coming up is Dave, as you said, if there was a permitting process, if we do have some whack job coming through that wants to put up the Nazi flag, and we deny that, or whoever committee denies it, we could get into issues of censorship, and I don't think that's a hole we want to go down. Again, not to keep talking about rabbit holes, but I think I would be more in support of keeping it the state flag as well as the American flag. For the reason similar to what Katie said, there are and with complete, in all due respect to the chief, we can memorialize the fallen officers. We have that new place by Muller Plaza, for example, even that we could do there.
Well,
Chief,
go ahead.
do you know offhand how many officers, can you hear me? Do you know offhand how many officers the City of Oneonta Police Department has lost since it was established? Is that any
In the line of
number
duty,
that
you mean?
you have on hand?
In the line of duty? That would be one. Back in the 40s, I think, Stanley Monahan was killed in a car car crash. As far as line of duty deaths, yeah.
Sorry, Chief, I missed all that. I froze up.
Yeah, you're
Could you
frozen
repeat that?
too. It was we've lost one officer in the line of duty in the history of the police department. That was back in the 40s. Guy named Stanley Monahan.
Okay. Is there anything in the department that's a memorial? I know you guys have a lot of history on the walls in the department. Is there a memorial wall or anything there
As
of any sort?
we have a frame display to Officer Monahan that hangs up in our lobby. That's about it. In the main lobby, we used to have, and they may have taken it down when they painted the big lobby. We used to have an American flag made out of the names of the police and firemen from 9/11. I'm not sure if that's still there or not. As far as the only other thing we have is that pegboard I told you about. That's on the outside right by the main entrance on the wall there.
Okay, thanks.
We're running out of time. I'll suggest that the legislative committee's role is generally to discuss legislation and when ready, bring it forward to council as a recommendation. We have no law that we're talking about presenting to council, but if you want to have this discussion on a policy brought up and discussed at the council, that's what we'd have to do anyway. But I don't think we have anything in terms of a recommendation that's really within our purview. And I'm old. I used to be an old radical fighting the police in the streets of Philadelphia during the Vietnam War. But I'm not particularly sensitive. I am sensitive to keeping up with the times. And I know that we're talking about political correctness and that sort of thing. It just, at least, I don't know, we're not talking about it directly. But I understand there was even someone who brought up the fact that the painting of the landscape that's on the shop on the mall towards the bottom of the street. What is that? There was a big concern raised that there's an Indian, and then there's also a frontiersman with a rifle, and I just understand there was some sort of public comment there about that being a very inappropriate, threatening sort of gesture. And I don't know where to go with these things sometimes. So we have a council. Let's bring it up at the council if you wish.
Dave,
I
if
don't.
we're going to make a policy change, does it have to? Do we just bring it to the council, and do we need a motion at the council, or what? Or what do we need?
As I understand it now, there is no policy.
There's no policy, right?
So if you want to establish a policy is established by the council. The council owns and controls all the flagpoles in the city. If the council wants to establish a policy, they establish a policy and they pass it by resolution. That's all. There's no local law. There's no ordinance.
Right.
It's simply the establishment of a policy that can be created or amended by the council at any time.
So maybe the question is, number one, how many flagpoles do we have in the city of Oneonta? And who currently decides what gets flown on the flagpoles? Does anybody have the answer to that question?
I want to say now, we can explore that, but we have another committee that's waiting to start. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
I would prefer to go by the time limits rather than to go.
Yeah, but I'd like an answer to my question, though. I don't want to leave this completely up in the air, John.
Okay, who knows? Who knows how many flagpoles we have?
There's at least three,
At least three,
at least three.
and he could be wrong.
There's,
And-
there's Mosky Field, the Armory, and Public Safety Building. Those are the three I know of.
Okay, and
There's a
who's,
flagpole in front of City Hall, isn't
We
there?
all are.
Is there
So
one?
I think that the
Yeah,
issue
sure.
would be, if they're all our flagpoles, the policy would go to all of them.
that was my point, John.
Yeah.
Okay,
Except we can reserve
I have a
one for
question
any
that I'm
damn
gonna
thing
make.
somebody wants to do. So,
Katie, you got a question? Go for it.
I'm going to email it. It's about half staff. Thanks, everybody.
That's determined by the federal government, the governor of the state of New York, or the mayor.
Okay.
If it's a federal issue, it's done by the federal government. If it's a state issue, it's done by the governor. If it's a city issue, it's done by the mayor.
Hmm.
That's under federal law.
I guess my
With
question
regard to
is,
with
I know
regard
I
to
was reading
half
the
staff.
flag code.
What's that, Katie?
I was reading the flag code and trying to figure that out in like 3 minutes. And which is why I figured I would just ask. So could theoretically, could the police department fly either the United States flag or the New York State flag at half staff for a fallen officer under the authority?
That would have to be
of the
determined by the
mayor?
mayor. It would be determined by the mayor
Okay.
or the
it
governor
wouldn't
if you
have to be
wanted
on
to
a
do it
case-
statewide. Yes,
It would have to be case by case,
it would be determined by the mayor.
but each time someone dies in the line of duty, or
The
could you say
mayor
blanket?
determines whether there's a half staff flying of the United States flag in the city. The governor decides
Okay.
statewide. The president of the
Right.
United States determines United States wide.
Dave, can we have can we get together with you to have a policy, a potential policy written to bring as a motion to the Common Council for discussion?
Tell me what you want in the policy, I'll draft it.
Okay, all right, I'll send you some items.
Okay,
and David, you could make a motion to have that considered by the council, not necessarily coming out of this discussion.
Well, there's no motion that we've,
You could bring it up at the council.
well, I think it should be on the agenda at the next council meeting. Are you saying that you don't want to have a vote to move this forward for a discussion at the Common Council?
Well, we won't have the motion.
Need that.
I'm not saying not to bring it up. You can bring it up. Or if you want to go 3-1, you guys can prevail. Or you can do it as an individual. You have every right. Any one of us has a right to bring.
Well,
a motion
I
to
know
the
that,
council.
John. I know the rules of.
I know.
of The
So,
agenda
the
on
rule-
the
I'd
council.
like to exercise a rule now. We have another committee that's about to start.
Yeah, I know.
and,
But I had asked to have some kind of a policy written for this meeting that we could discuss, and I still don't have that. And
I-
now it just seems very ambiguous here. I don't know where we're going with this other than I can bring it up if I want at the council meeting.
I
And
don't,
in the
I
meantime,
can't,
I've got to now get a policy written. And I want to make sure that I can get that on the agenda rather than having to bring it up and have nobody see the written policy for the discussion, because I can see what can happen at the next meeting. If everybody's going to say, well, I haven't heard about this, why is it being brought up just now? I want some time to think about this policy that's in front of me.
So
think
can
what
I
has
ask a
been-
question of the mayor? Can't Dave just email you a motion for the agenda? Can't it
Yeah.
just be put on the agenda as
Or-
a discussion item? And then we could have it all in advance. You
I
would
think
have to
there-
bring it up, right?
Our practice is to not put things on the agenda unless they've gone through the committee. I think the real issue here, Dave, is that if we're going to, if, in order for the policy to go through the committee first, it's not going to make it on the next council meeting. You're gonna have to wait for the next legislative committee meeting. If you don't want to wait for the next legislative committee meeting to get it onto the council agenda, then do what Dave is suggesting and bring it up on your own as a motion.
All right, I will get what I can to David, and if it looks like it's not going to be ready for the next council meeting, I will bring it to back to this committee for discussion, further discussion. So, I mean, unless.
I'm not trying to hamper you in this. I do think there's a time pressure. However,
Yeah, but I know
The
there's a
mayor-
time pressure, but I don't like a conversation being cut just because another meeting is happening, John. That's not fair to anybody here. We've all taken time to, out of our schedules to meet. And in the middle of a discussion, I don't want it to be cut off. So
what
if-
do you
if Luke
need?
and
David,
Katie want me to
What do you
wait,
need? I'm only cutting you off because I have no policy either.
well, if Luke and Katie want me to wait, and if people want me to wait and bring the policy back to the committee, I'll do that. If people want to move to have this on the agenda at the next council meeting, I will bring it forward if it's not going to be put on the agenda so we can discuss it there as a group. Just tell me what you want to do.
I see. I mean, we've discussed this for 25 minutes. I think good points are made. I see no reason why we have to cut it off here. I think we should bring it forward to council.
So whatever is going to be brought to council, who's doing that?
I guess I will.
Somebody's got to, because we don't have a policy to bring forward. So I'll leave it at that.
Well,
Each of us can be plain spoken in the council as well as here. And I want to keep this meeting now because other people are sacrificing their time as well. And we had 2 items on the agenda. I think an hour was enough to discuss them. So
Okay,
with
thanks,
that, I
everybody.
move to adjourn in respect of the next group. I move. Do you want to adjourn or not? God, you guys don't know the rules. So
I guess so, John.
you do want to second that motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay,
are we
that's you
voting?
and me. Huh?
Are we voting?
2-2. If you change.
What?
We've got to end sometime. Other
Okay.
people
Goodbye,
are waiting
everyone.
to start. Okay,
I think Dave Risberger is gone. I'm gonna go. Thank you.
sure. Split.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
John, you don't need to have it approved